Another great guy has been waiting patiently.
Uh-oh.
Hiya folks, Gord Pyzer here for Outdoor Canada magazine, and I want to talk about falling for fish. What I really want to talk about is fishing in the fall period. You know, I love the fall, probably my favorite time of the year for a whole bunch of good reasons. If you look over my shoulder right now, I have the whole lake to myself. All the prime spots on this water body, there's not another boat on them. Even better still, in the fall, fish behave exactly like black bears. You know, believe it or not, a black bear will feed for over 20 hours a day in the fall, trying to gain as much nourishment as possible to get it through that cold winter period. Well, walleye, smallmouth, largemouth, muskies, northern pike, black crappies, all do the very, very same thing. They're feeding intensively to get them through the upcoming cold winter period. So what's the message? Don't put the boat to bed too early this fall.
Don't we know that?
Hey, morning.
Hey, boys.
How are you, bud?
Doing well.
Good. Sorry, we're a little late there. We got all caught up in this cormorant issue.
I was listening, and I thought, you know what? I think I'll talk crappies instead of crap.
Good one. Good transition, Gordy. That's why you are the man right there, brother.
First of all, how is the transition period coming along up north? How's the fall coming?
Spectacular, Ange. We had 19 degrees today, and had I not been doing, but I was out 2 days ago for smallmouth, and probably the best bite this year.
What?
Nice.
You kill me. Every time you're on, you're telling me you have the best bite. Like, do you ever have a bad day?
He's getting that much better every day.
But you know what? You guys saw the muskie, eh?
Oh.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing.
Tell us a story about that.
My buddy John, and he's not in the greatest of health right there. There's the fish. 6-pound test line, a 1/4 ounce jig, and a crappie minnow. Can you believe it? We go out with $1 million of tackle in our boat. We've got 18 musky rods. We're happy if we see a follow.
Yeah.
We go out with a jig and a minnow fishing for crappies, and he hooked on. And then what we did, we spot locked. He started yelling. His knees were knocking. I was right beside him. And so I pulled my boat up, and we paralleled each other, spot locked, and he brought it right in between the boat. And all I had was a walleye net. And I got it head first in the walleye net. 3/4 of the fish was dangling outside of the net, and I brought him in the boat. Was 48 inches and change, but it was one of the fattest fish I've ever landed. I guarantee 34, 35 pounds.
Gordy, how does that happen? How do you land a fish that size on 6-pound test line? Like, how?
With teeth like a shark, by the way, on 6-pound test line, right?
We were so lucky because John hooked it right on. I could see the jig outside, and this is gonna blow your mind. He lost a minnow about 30 seconds beforehand, little tiny minnow. He baits up another minnow drop, so that I'm positive that muskie was eating 2-inch crappie minnows. But here's the funny thing, guys. Liam, 2 years ago, we landed the biggest lake trout we've ever pulled through a hole in the ice, and we were fishing for yellow perch, and he landed that one on 4-pound test line. And so many people said, how do you land them? And you know what the secret is? Never putting pressure on the fish. Yep. I honestly believe that muskie and the lake trout that Liam caught, I honestly believe neither of those fish knew they were hooked.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, Angie, you and I have done that up north on fishing for walleye, jigging minnow up in northern Ontario. You're looking for your shore lunch, and all of a sudden this 18, 20-pound northern comes in and just gives you that hit, and you're thinking there's a walleye, and all of a sudden, what the hell is that?
Again, this is the honest truth. And I did not put this in my blog. We left that spot. We went to the next area. About 20 minutes later, Pete, I was doing exactly what you said. I set on a walleye, about a 16-inch fish. All of a sudden, down to the bottom, and I had another muskie on. And it hit the walleye. It could have been a 2-trophy day, and we weren't even fishing for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
think about that. Wow.
here's what I'm thinking here. I'm trying to draw this picture up, and it makes so much sense. So the muskie are there feeding on. No, think about it.
I love your wheels turning like this. Gord Pyzer's the only man on earth that can get your wheels turning like that, by the way. Okay? Just you know.
Muskie are there feeding obviously on walleye or crappie, whatever it is that you're after that day. They're on the outside, the perimeter, right? Just waiting for the opportunity to chow down on one of these other smaller predator fish, if you will. Why wouldn't they take the odd little minnow that comes swimming out of that school? You know what I mean?
Opportunistic, and if it's there, and all I got to do is open my mouth and eat it, and
why not?
And it's got a 1/4-ounce jig. We were fishing black and yellow jig, and there's a minnow on the end. If there's no effort,
why not? So then that leads me to ask this question, Gord. Why wouldn't you kind of change your game plan at that point and say, hey, there's muskie in the area. They're obviously on the bite. I'm going to switch my tactics up and go after these giant muskie.
If I had muskie baits and muskie rods on the boat, I would have. We were walleye, bass, and crappie fishing. I had unloaded everything out of the boat, restocked it with the. But Ange, your point is really well taken. I had so many folks afterwards, and guys have been. We've had a really good. This has been a premier muskie year, and so I've had a lot of folks lately saying, "What should I target?" And I have two answers. Number one is muskies always are where you find them. I mean, we love to be science about it, eh? You know, rocky points, bars, show. Those damn things are wherever you find them. And your point earlier was, if you're walleye fishing, catching walleyes, if you're smallmouth and crappie fishing, you can almost bet there's another bigger predator close by, whether it's a lake trout, a big northern pike, or a muskie. I mean, that's what they're feeding on.
Sure.
One other thing I've said to a lot of folks recently, when the guys were doing Project Noble Beast on the Ottawa River, and that's where Muskies Inc. and the boys were actually tracking big muskies. And I spoke to the folks that were doing the tracking studies, and they said, every third or fourth cast, you should make out to no man's land. And if more often we would fish out in no man's land, we would catch, because they're tracking these things and they just show up where they shouldn't be. They're not on points, they're not on bars, they're not on weed edges. You know, it's like that 1,000-pound gorilla where it can sleep wherever it wants.
Wherever it wants. How true is that?
You know what, boys, I'd have to say, I think that goes for all species and not just muskie. I do believe that goes for all fish species. I've seen so many times where I'll just fire a cast with a Senko out the opposite way of the shoreline that somebody fishing, just a stupid cast, and it's not going to catch, and boom, a 3.5-pound largemouth out in the middle of nowhere, no weeds, no nothing. I think it happens a lot more than people would, expect on all species.
You know, Pete, you know what I think it is we, on those other species, we do find the really good structure and cover. So we'll find a weed edge. The other day, you and I, we were talking last time about those deep weed lines and how they move out to secondary, tertiary points.
Yep.
But they're not just on that structure. They cruise the outside.
Right.
Those bigger fish, they're patrolling around. And we get too finite. We get a little bit too specific. I got to have this bait. I got to be on this structure. No, you don't.
No, you know what? Bass are a great species. We'll move a little bit to that, especially in the fall. And Ange and I have been noticing this a lot with Garmin's Live Scope, is that they rarely sit still. They're not like those ones that are out. Maybe one under a log. Yeah, he lives under that log. He stays in that cover. There's one on a rock or something like that. Individual fish here and there. The majority of those fish are moving all the time, always moving and hunting and swimming, whatever they're doing. I don't know, but they're moving a lot.
I have a friend, Mark Alford, down in the Ottawa area. Actually lives in a little town called Griffith. And I'll tell you right now, Mark is probably the best open water whitefish angler in North America. No, he probably fishes whitefish in open water 120 days a year in open water. So nobody does that.
Yeah.
He was fishing the other day, and I think they got like 40, 50, 60 whitefish, and like almost Simcoe size.
Oh,
Pete, he said the fish were moving so quickly, he watched them just swim right through the sonar. And your point is so well taken. And especially in the fall right now,
yeah.
they are on the move. They're moving from summer location to winter. And for all the guys that fish for muskies, muskie anglers, there's a critical temperature I always look for. And John Castleman, Dr. Castleman, really was the one that got me on this. And John did so much great muskie tracking work. When the water temperature hits 59, 60 degrees, 15 Celsius, muskie's home range breaks down. And until it drops to 5-degree water temperature, they are roamers. They roam from 15 to 5, or from 60 to about 40. So 59 to about 40. They can be any, and this is the time of the year. So what do we always say? We always say in the fall, trolling is the best option. And you know what? I hate trolling. I hate trolling for much. I know it is the best fish I've ever caught have been trolling, but I hate doing it. I'd much rather cast. But the reason is those two moving targets. Muskies are moving, you're moving. You can't predict really often where they're going to be. Two moving targets have a much better chance of meeting up and hitting each other.
And I think that can be said for all species, though. This time of year, it's just a different mentality that you have to be in. And you have to be on the move. These fish, and you just said, to your point, they're moving. And the only way to have a really successful day is you got to move too. More so now than during the summer period, and even to some extent the spring period. You've got to be, and trolling, as much as a lot of us don't like doing it, it is an effective way, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You look at those Bay of Quinte walleye right now. They're starting to make a major move right now. That's not for feeding; it's for spawning. But they're going to eat that whole entire trip until they get in there. You know what I mean? So it's all about movement right now.
Yeah,
really great point, Pete. I've got a piece coming out in Outdoor Canada tomorrow. I've had so many writers, and actually I answered a really good question I received from a writer, and he echoed what 5 or 6 other people have written in or emailed into the magazine, and they're saying we can't find walleye anymore, and places like the Bay of Quinte, Lake Winnipeg, with the Red River, Lake of the Woods with the Rainy River, and what walleye will do on those giant Lake Erie as well with the Thames River. What they do is they move in the fall. It's actually a spawning move. They move in the fall to winter out in front of where they will spawn next spring. It doesn't make any sense to a fish to go through the winter and then all of a sudden swim 40, 50, 60 miles if it's full of eggs to get to a river. They stage out in front. So right now, those fish are moving into the Bay of Quinte. They'll spend the winter in there, and trolling is a great option. But as you know, throwing swim baits is probably the most overlooked trick for those Bay of Quinte walleyes.
And more fun too, eh? And more fun.
By the way,
more fun.
We have a lot more people that love trolling than we think. A lot of people are saying, "What do you mean you don't like trolling? I love trolling."
It's a very popular way of fishing, for sure.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. You know, when we go lake trout, even right now, there's only a couple more days left in the lake trout series. As much, I mean, I got downriggers on the boat. We got dip sea divers and lead core outfits. I still would much rather cast and jig for them.
And by the way, I was telling Pete this story last week. Can't remember what brought it on, but about, I don't know, I'm going to say 25, 30 years ago, I was fishing. Reno and I were fishing the big Kingston tournament for smallmouth bass. And at that time, the perennial winner, like I'm talking every year for 5 years in a row, was this charter boat, and a big, like I'm going to say probably a 30-foot charter boat. And he would go out in the morning. He wouldn't even blast off. Like, we're in there with our little 17 foots with a $1.50 on the back, causing all kinds of havoc. He'd wait till all the dust cleared and then just putter out. He'd be back by 9:30 weighing in every day. Every day, and he'd wipe us all out. And we figured out what he was doing. We finally saw him after a few years. The guy was trolling for smallmouth bass out in front of these big long points that lead into those shallow back bays. While we're in the back there vertically trying to do our thing, he'd just troll up and down, in 12 to 18 feet of water and smacking them like crazy.
Yeah.
Even in the spring, trolling works, and even for bass, right?
And I have talked to two, and now I've never fished the tournaments you guys fish down there, but I've talked to a couple guys that fish the tournaments on Rito. Yeah. And they have talked to, one guy told me he went in, this guy came over and he was lake trout trolling with downriggers. And the guy said, if you want to catch them, and he said, this is what you got to do. But he said, no way. And he said, come to take a look at it. And the guy had 7-pound smallmouth in the freezer that he caught on downriggers.
Oh, yeah. Why not?
But absolutely, they eat what the trout eat. If that's where the cyst goes and the smell and all that high quality, high protein forages, they behave like lake trout.
Yeah. Hey,
now,
Gordon,
I want to say one quick thing for all the bass guys out there. The other day when I said how good the bass were, they are tight. So yes, we move, and we'll go spot after spot after spot. But trust me, right now, if you catch one, there's 100 there with it.
Oh, I like that.
Crazy.
I hate when you say that kind of stuff. Hey, Gord, can I throw one quick question at you, or a quick observation? I caught a walleye. I got 2 walleye this weekend. Cleaned them both. One had eggs in her already.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They will have eggs starting in July, Pete.
Okay.
So, in fact, walleye are maintenance feeders in the winter. So, yes, they eat, and yes, they will hit our baits. Smallmouth are even worse. Smallmouth are just like the black bear we were talking about in the video. But walleye and smallmouth, they need as much nourishment as possible right now to get them through the winter starvation period. So probably 75–80% of the egg development, it has occurred right now. And after ice out, it's so quick to spawning period. All they do is it's a very quick maturation process. So they'll feed a little bit and then they'll spawn, but 90% of that happens before ice up.
So what would be a late initial development of the eggs? And this fish has had a good amount of eggs. It wasn't a big fish. It was a small, it was 18-inch walleye or something like that. Perfect eater. And it had, a decent amount of eggs throughout its stomach. It wasn't bulbous or anything like that. Are there female fish right now, walleye, in, let's just say, this part of southern Ontario that don't have eggs yet, but are going to develop eggs? Or is it kind of it should be already there by now?
No, they should all be there by now. They're running out of time. And this is the other interesting thing, Pete, to your point. It's called sonomic growth. The growth that they actually devote to themselves, a female, it's only a matter of a few weeks. It's only like 14, 21 days of the year. They're really growing for themselves. And virtually all the rest of the energy they're accumulating is toward egg maturation and egg development. And of course, that's the reason the biggest fish, other than smallmouth, believe it or not, male smallmouth are as big as female, but muskies, rare to catch a male over 40 inches. Walleye, always females. Northern pike, very same. So they're feeding right now for egg development, and they have all the eggs in them right now. They may not be full size,
Right.
but they will have all the eggs inside them right now developing that they're going to lay next spring. And you know, the interesting thing is ice fishermen will catch a fish and they'll keep it, and it might be a 16-inch, 17-inch walleye. And, you know, some folks will say, geez, you're killing a female with all the eggs in it. Well, you're doing the same thing right now.
Yeah. People wouldn't realize it for sure. Now,
Yeah.
I'll change this up. You're staying on fall. I always like to know this. What is Lake in the Woods or wherever you've been fishing lately water temperature? Right? Because I've got a feeling it's very close to what our water temperatures are right now. What are you running for the most part?
Yeah, you know, today, as I say, today was 19, 20 degrees. So on the surface, I'll bet today on the surface was 59. It might have even touched 60, 61, but that's only an inch or two. And folks should never get fooled by the surface temperature. Oh, it went up 10 degrees today. Well, that's the top inch or two. And circulation circulates it. But underneath where the fish are right now, it's 56, 57, 59 degrees.
Yeah.
And that's perfect migration, moving around. They're feeding up their bears. They gotta eat as much energy right now to get through that fall, winter starvation period.
Do you follow thermoclines at all, Gord?
Thermocline's breaking down right now. So right now the lake is in turnover. And that's the other really cool thing. And we should talk about that for the walleye folks, because once you get turnover and the thermocline breaks down, the whole lake's exposed to the fish. It's almost optimal temperature, or the same temperature from top to bottom. So walleye that were excluded from deep structures all through the summer, now they're available. And so there's no concrete brick wall, if you like, the thermocline that prohibited them from going deeper. And now the whole lake's open. And the other cool thing is ciscos and whitefish, they spawn in the fall. So they're coming shallower and shallower and shallower as the walleye and bass are going deeper and deeper and deeper. Ooh, and pike and muskies, and they all interact and meet, and it's game on, boys.
Look at Ange, watch this. Where's my finger? I got to see if I can see it. How can I tell? This is to Gord. How can I tell when my lake is turning over? That was a question I had tonight, Gordo. So that's what we're talking about this. How the hell can we tell? Because we're in southern Ontario. You're way up in northern Ontario. Is there an indication that we can tell when our lake is turning over?
There are a couple of ways, Pete, but water temperature is the critical one. If your surface temperatures are in the high 50s, the lake is turning over. It's starting to turn over, and full turnover happens when it gets down a little bit cooler than this. Certainly, water's densest, heaviest when it's 40 degrees. So overnight, we've had a couple nights of frost, and on the surface, that means the surface cooled probably to 40 degrees, or, you know, a millimeter or two, and that's dense. It starts to fall, and then the wind will turn it over, and it starts to mix, and that's how it cools down. But once your lake gets into the mid 50s, it's starting to, the thermocline is fully eroding, it's turning over, and it's opening up the lake, and the walleye, bass and northern pike and muskies can start going deeper, and the ciscos and lake trout and whitefish are coming up, and everything's interacting and meeting with each other.
So once your surface temp hits 55, is that what you're saying?
I mean, full turnover is when it's 40. And when it's 40, the whole lake will be 40 degrees. It'll be 40 on the surface and 40 down below. And there's no thermal conflict, if you will, to mixing. So if you get wind when water's 40 degrees, it starts turning the lake over. And that's how nature restores oxygen to the bottom. It takes surface oxygenated water, and wind causes that to go down to the bottom. Plus at night, once we get close to that 40 degrees, 42, 44, it's sinking, because the surface overnight is starting to chill. So that water's sinking down, it's heavier, and the wind's churning it over, and it's bringing oxygen down to the bottom.
So
that's a lot for a person to chew, by the way. Just
yeah.
For those of you out there who are sitting there saying, "Huh? What did he say?" Don't feel embarrassed. Okay, that was a lot of information there, and the best thing to do is to search it out, find a good. Well, I'm sure Gord's got a gazillion blogs out there with that
I
subject,
do.
and study it. Where can you send them for that, Gord? Is there a place
Outdoor Canada, I did a specific piece on fall turnover. I believe it was last year. It might have been the year before, and it's definitely on outdoorcanada.ca. Type in Pyzer thermocline, and you'll read about it. But the really cool, I mean, this is Mother Nature at her most brilliant. Water is densest at 40 degrees. That means at 39, it floats, and at 42, it floats. And water at 40, that means just there's a point in the spring and a point in the fall always when your lake will be 40 degrees top to bottom. And that's how oxygen gets replenished to the bottom. In the fall, it'll keep getting colder at the surface. It'll go from 40 to 39. I'm still old school in Fahrenheit. So it goes from 40 to 39, and 39, it's floats. It's less dense than 40. And that's why when you drill a hole in the wintertime, it's 32 on the surface and 40 down below. And in the summertime, it'll be 80 on the surface and 40 down below.
We have a great question. We have to answer it from our good friend, Uncle Jack Summers from Radio World. He wants to know, does water temperature affect the density of the water? And to that question, he believes that his boat has a higher top end in the spring and fall.
I do too, Jack. 100%. I believe it cruises better. I believe we feel it, and I do believe it's that as it gets down closer to the magic 40 degrees, as it's cooling and the surface is dropping, I do believe the water being heavier, being more dense, it definitely is at 40, and I definitely do believe. The other thing, guys, I have no reason to. I have no science, but I do believe this is the case. We see less really significant. I mean, it gets wavy in the fall, but I do think it is. Maybe it's just me sensing it, but I think as we get into later October and November, it takes more wind to create the same waves.
Wow!
I got a question.
So?
I got a question for Jack Summers. What the hell has your boat speed at top end got to do with catching fish? Like, who cares, Jack?
He wants to get to them ahead of you guys.
Yeah, okay. That's about the only chance he's got. How's that sound?
Gord, last time, Paul says, Gord, last time that you mentioned about bass will not feed until they find their home if taken away from that spot and released in the fall. Is this also true of summer season when during our tournaments, for example, they're caught and released away from their home area?
We when I was with M&R for 31 years, and when I was up here, district manager in Kenora, we replicated Mark Ridgway's work in Opeongo, and Mark did some of the most brilliant tracking work. But here on Lake of the Woods, we tracked. We put radio tags in a pretty good number of smallmouth bass and largemouth, but in the smallmouth, and then we moved them. We intentionally moved them from their home ranges, and the further we moved them, the more difficulty they had getting home. But they are so faithful to spring, summer, fall home ranges, they will spend all of their time looking for home. Now, in smaller systems, so if you're in the Kawarthas or the Muskokas, or in a small lake, a 6, 7, 800 acre lake. In fact, when Mark did his work on Opeongo, and Opeongo's a decent sized water, he took them across 120, 150 feet in the spring. They were back on their nests before he boated back. That's how fast. So they knew how to get back to their spring. That's how faithful they are. So we wanted to find out on Lake of the Woods, that's 1 million acres of water, 14,000 islands, 65,000 miles of shoreline here. And the unfortunate part was the further we moved them, the more difficulty they had finding their way back home. In the fall, when we did some work in the fall, and what happened in the fall, if they hadn't made their way home, up to 50% of the fish were dead over winter. They starved because they weren't in the fall, as we've been talking about. This is when you better bulk up. This is when you better do what the bears are doing and add nourishment. And they weren't doing that. They were going, my God, I got to get home. I got to get to my fall spot. And so they weren't feeding. And just again, another good caution, because I know most of the guys listening are good conservationists, and most of the bass anglers catch and release, but catch and release in the fall on the spots where you're catching them. The further you take them away for that hero shot at the end of the day, you might have killed every one of the fish in the live well. Now, you'll say, oh, they swam away, they were in great shape, but they're not going to feed now. They're looking for home. And if you move them 25 miles with a bunch of islands in between, our work showed they died.
How did you track them, Gord? How did you track those fish to find out the 50% died?
They had individual sonar returns. So there's sonar tags. And
Okay.
so we snorkeled and scuba dived down when they were on the nest, brought them up in, and we actually surgically opened them up, and we put radio transmitters inside, and then we sewed them back up, and everyone had an individual frequency. So when we were listening to them on the, we knew, you know, there's Betty, there's George, there's Pete, there's Ange, and they some of them were named.
Wow.
And the further we moved them away, the greater they had difficulty finding home, and the greater the chance they were going to die over the winter.
And to your point,
sorry, Anson, so I'm going to just carry on this kind of a two-part question. So those ones that didn't make it back, were they at least on the track to get back, or were they way off and they just got lost out in the middle of the abyss of Lake of the Woods?
It's the further we move them, Pete, that's what happened. One of Mark's fish, believe it or not, he dropped them, he moved them, and then dropped it a fair distance away. It swam around like it could have been an island like Georgina. It swam around the island the entire summer, never stopped.
Wow.
And it didn't know, you know, I better move, but it kept, I don't know where I am. And he kept spinning balls.
Wow.
Now here, this is interesting because folks will also say, you know, bass also migrate new areas, and they'll move to an area and they survive. And yet, you know, 50% did, although 50% died. But we also had a couple fish, believe it or not, they were close enough. Now, this is the difference. We moved them not so far that they couldn't find their way home. They actually swam about 11 miles, and they were coming back, and they were very, very close to where we moved them from, and they turned around and went back, and it was almost as though they said, you know what, where you dropped me off, it was a hell of a lot better than where I came from. And they went back.
That's awesome.
But here's the real takeaway. We say to ourselves, these are dumb fish with brains that are the size of our small fingernail. These are amazingly adapted creatures, and that know their water so well. And it's what I've always said, and muskies are the same. We start sticking rattles inside of baits, and we throw topwaters that make a lot of noise. And let me tell you, if you're throwing for largemouth and you're throwing for smallmouth, or I'm casting for muskies, it knew the minute your bait hit the water. You didn't need to add a rattle to tell it I'm up here.
No kidding. No kidding. Absolutely.
And it's why finesse has really taken off. I was down on Lake Mead several years ago, and I fishing with Roy Hawk, one of the best anglers down in the U.S. And believe it or not, Lake Mead is, and you guys, I think, have fished down there, and you've seen Mead just outside of Vegas. I mean, we don't know what fishing pressure is like
until you go there.
So yeah, you go there. I mean, on a spinnerbait, if you don't hit it immediately you're not getting that fish. You better know how to set a hook now. But anyway, we were on a pretty good topwater bite, and Roy was fighting, and it was the first time I'd ever seen this. And it's something folks can stick up their bass quivers. So Roy threw out on a point, and he's pulling it across, and he's pulling a big bass comes out and explodes on his bait. Boy, he missed it. So what do we do? What do most anglers do when that happens? We fire right back in and hope the fish is going to hit it again. Roy threw as far away from where that fish hit, and he said, I'm always looking for the maximum distance. I don't want to be so far that they won't come out and chase it, but I want to find that maximum threshold. So he was firing out like maybe 40 yards, 20 yards away, and he was catching those fish. And that's when I discovered, forget the rattles for muskies, forget, these fish know when we're throwing baits up on the surface. And he blew my mind that day. He never, ever threw back into the same fish.
We find that hard to believe, and yet we just talked about a fish that can travel 40, 50 miles back to its home range. Like, how does it know? We just moved it to the other side of the lake. How does it know? Pete and I experienced that just the other day. We put some new electronics on FNC1 and took it out just to test it. We went to a local harbor here, and it was just full of salmon. Big 30+ pound salmon in a harbor, no incoming water, no nothing. And then we find out that they had been planted there 4 years earlier, and obviously these fish are returning. But my question is the old question: how do they know? How does that smallmouth on Opeongo know that 42 miles to the southeast is where it lives?
And the more interesting thing, it had never been there, obviously, in its life. And yet it still found its way. And Mark believes that they have some kind of a magnetic response. It's kind of like salmon. That is the kind of accepted theory with salmon, that they will travel 800 miles in the ocean and then go 1,000 miles up the Yukon River and spawn in the same gravel shoal it was born. Like, how do they do it? And we think these things are dumb.
So those fish that Ange were talking about too, let everybody listening here. So they're stocked in the harbor. Okay. Now, if the people stocking these fish were to just dump them in the harbor and let them go, okay, hey, perfect. They're going to come back in 5 years. They won't come back in 5 years. What they do is they have to put these fish, this is how fish's systems work. They put these fish into a cage, and they put them in a cage for 6 weeks. And then it's called imprinting. It imprints into these fish. This is their home. And if they don't do that for 6 weeks, they won't know where. After that 6 weeks, they let them go, and guaranteed they're going to come back to that same spot. How freaky is that?
Now, I maybe shouldn't share this, but I know the guys that are listening, the smallmouth, the bass guys are good guys here. The downside of how faithful these fish are, if you caught a trophy last year or 4 years ago at this time of the year or in another couple of weeks, trust me, you go back to that spot today, it will be there. It will be there. Its relatives will be there. Now, here's the downside, and we found it on Lake of the Woods when we did our tracking, and Mark found the very same thing. And I used to co-chair the Ontario-Minnesota Fisheries Technical Committee. So all the fish managers in Northwest Ontario and Minnesota, I chaired that with Jack Skrypek. And Minnesota did some phenomenal work on this as well. No matter how much pressure on that shoal you exert on those fish, they will not leave. They will not leave. So you can put 50 boats on it, and those fish will stay right there. So if the guys here, the folks here, you have a favorite spot in the fall where you've caught really nice fish, go there, and they will be there. They will.
Is that smallmouth, Gord? Is that what you're talking about, smallmouth?
That is smallmouth. Smallmouth are so, it's frightening. Nothing more than frightening how faithful they are to their spring spawning spot. We had them coming, we numbered house bricks, number 5, number 12, number whatever. And we had the bass tagged. They were carrying Floyd tags, and we had sonic tags. And no matter where they wintered, 8 miles away, they would come back and spawn the exact same fish on the exact same rock until
Wow.
they died.
That's awesome.
Wow.
So awesome.
So what we never did do it, but what we wanted to do was cover them up, and so that they couldn't spawn. And then the question is, what would they have done then if they came back and we had tarpaulin? It would make for a really good science experiment. Would they move and spawn somewhere else, or would they just absorb the eggs?
Huh.
Calvin wants to say that he thinks it may be something related to scent. Is it possible?
Absolutely. They every river smells different. So on those salmon, you know.
But hang on, that's rivers and that's salmon, but you're talking smallmouth bass on a rock, Gord. On a rock. How can that be?
That's the same fish that beat Mark back in the boat and was nesting, and it traveled across. And
It's a built-in GPS, boys, just like that Garmin right there. It's built-in GPS. That's why I wear this stuff, Angelo. Right there, buddy, because we know the fish use it, so we got to catch up with the fish, so we have to use it too. There you go, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages.
All that to go a long roundabout way to tell you these new Garmin units that we played with, Gord, a couple days ago. Okay, I always defend us being the fishing fraternity, because people are always saying, yeah, well, you know what, you guys, it's unfair. You guys have got unfair advantages. You got all that equipment and technology. Well, of course you're going to catch fish. And I always say, yeah, you know what? I wouldn't call it unfair. I call it using all the tools that are available to you, but we still have to get them in the boat. However, I have to maybe change that comment moving forward, because the technology that Pete and I played with a couple of days ago, what did I tell you, Pete? I said, first thing I said, well, this isn't fair. This is not fair. This is unfair, because it is. It's that good.
But Ange, I have said this many, many years as well. I do honestly believe M&R and the agencies do need to take hard looks. When I first came to Kenora, when we did our creel work, the reality is most anglers used to spend 80–90% of their day looking for fish and 10% catching. The reality today, we have gotten so good. We can now spend 80–90%. But the other reality is we don't have to kill them. We enjoy doing what we enjoy. We are better handlers of fish. Muskie survival rates are the best they've ever been. Bass survival rates are the best they've ever been. So we can have our cake and eat it too. But M&R needs to catch up with us.
Interesting point. Marco wants to know, how territorial are big pike?
And what's the best lures and I honestly, I don't know. I speculate. I do believe that the larger pike are territorial. I know that muskies are, and they're the same family. A large muskie, a large female is so territorial. She will protect a spawning area. And I mean, the ultimate is if she is the only one spawning there, she will protect it to be the only one if possible. Now, most times that's not possible. But if you then caught and killed her, no other muskies come in there to spawn. She protected it often so well. And you should have John Castleman on and talk to John about this. Muskie territoriality is absolutely brilliant. Best lures right now, this is the time of year for me. This is the time of year, truly. And I know we caught that muskie the other day on a minnow, but you can't get me away in the fall from big baits rule. This is when I throw the biggest baits possible. And by all means, absolutely, the muskie will hit a minnow, but you show it a T-bone steak, you show it that beef Wellington, it's expenditure of energy. It can eat a really, and that's why honestly, I shouldn't even share this, but I will. I love throwing whitefish Cisco colored baits. There's a bait I love, a rover. It's a rover swim bait made by a guy named Smith, Landry Smith. Go online, you can see it. But Landry makes a rover swim bait that looks identical to a Cisco, and he makes one that's about 12 inches long. I almost dislocate my elbow and my arm casting the damn thing. But it catches pike. And now the downside again, you weed out the smaller fish by and large. But I'll go all day for that one bite.
Yeah, another thing, just to add to that, Gord, we've talked about it on the radio show numerous times, usually in the fall when we're talking about big baits for fall. The opposite is usually true in the spring. And one of the reasons for that is because the prey that these fish are accustomed to eating in the fall, they're at the largest size, just like the predator is at its largest through the season. And so they can get conditioned to eating these big chunks of food. If you're throwing a little wee bait to it, it's not going to cut it because that doesn't belong there. It's out of place. Conversely speaking, in the spring, in the fall, when things are just blooming and blossoming and giving birth, everything is tiny, everything is small, and you see in the spring some of these anglers in shallow water throwing these great big gaudy baits, and you wonder, wow, somebody needs to talk to this person about that. That's when you want to go small, ultra small, micro small. But in the fall, the bigger, I don't think you can get big enough.
I honestly don't either, Ange. In fact, I will be honest, when we troll, we honestly troll baits because we can't throw them. They're that big.
Yeah. Big.
Now, I will also say this, so you're right about the spring, but Ange, I always push the envelope. So yes, in the spring, we throw small baits, but this will sound strange. We throw the biggest small bait we can.
Of course.
But a big bait in the spring might be 7-8 inches. A big bait right now will be 14, 15, and you need to put it in a rod holder. It's bucking so bad.
Oh God, that's so true, right?
Can we take a couple of questions and then we could be here all night with Gordy. That's the unfortunate part. Gord, got a school of walleye related to each other?
Yeah, absolutely they are. This is brilliant. They are related often. You will not believe this, but a muskie or a walleye rather, by and large, doesn't know where to spawn for the very first time. When a walleye on Lake of the Woods, for example, and Val Masons are the late Val Masons here on Lake of the Woods, used to be the Lake of the Woods biologist. And Val did some work again with Minnesota. 1/3 of Lake of the Woods is in Minnesota. And we do a lot of cooperative work together. So we tagged walleyes and we did, Val did some brilliant work. And essentially, the reality is walleyes on Lake of the Woods, a male at 15 inches and female 16. That's the first time they spawn. Generally, they spawn for the first time 15, 16 inches. And they don't know where to go. They do not know where to spawn. So how do they spawn? They hook up with a school of larger fish and they follow them. And we talked about imprinting on salmon, Pete did. They get smarter and they remember, oh yeah. And it builds and builds and builds. But as a general principle, walleye follow older walleye to the spawning areas. And that's how they get imprinted on where to spawn.
Wow.
I can't make this stuff up. It's so
You
great.
got that right, Gord. You can't make this stuff up. That is good.
Have you ever fished Lake Tomiko?
That's the one around North Bay. My second job with M&R was in North Bay, and there is a Tomiko lake there. And I'll be honest, no, I did not. I fished Trout Lake outside of North Bay. I used to go up to Temagami and all the lakes there. I used to fish Nipissing, but I haven't fished Tomiko. I think it's a trout lake. I'm pretty sure it's a trout lake, but unfortunately, no. That's the problem with Ontario. 400,000 lakes.
God.
We haven't fished 1%, eh?
Yep, you're right. All of us together have not fished 1%, for sure. Guaranteed.
How attuned to structure walleye and bass in the fall during the transition?
It's really, really good point. What I always say is we know where they're coming from. We know where they're going to. Now they will travel right now. What I always do is I know we talked about those smallmouth being on those home areas, and we know where they summered. What I always look for are the structures in between. I know where they're coming from. I know where they're going to, but I have a blog coming out. I actually have one out right now on Northern Ontario tourism. So go to the tourism blog, and I'm actually throwing lipless crankbaits and blade baits. And we've been doing pretty well on those flat bottomed areas that really aren't structury. And I think those fish are on the move. But I will say this, Pete was talking about sonar. You put her on side imaging or down imaging, and you find 15, 20 stones, boulders, gravel, whatever, on an otherwise flat bottom of muck. And the difference in the depth is zero. And those fish are sitting right on that slightly harder structure. And the other thing I'm finding right now, so if this is the bottom, and then you come to a structure, and let me see, and it starts going up, right at that V, I guarantee you right now, on every V where the bottom meets a piece of structure, there's walleye on Lake of the Woods. It is uncanny how they are on the bottom, but right on the edge of that structure.
Huh, that's interesting. That's a good one.
Use this analogy, and this is probably a good time to use it. If somebody airlifted you in the middle of the Sahara Desert and gave you a GPS, and you knew where the end point was, you knew where you had to go, and you had two routes to take it: the open desert or an area that takes you through some little oases all along to the destination, 99.99%, if not 100% of us are going to take the longer route, maybe, but we've got some places to rest. You find sustenance, hide, get away from the sun's heat, whatever the case may be, as opposed to going straight across the desert. So, is simple analogy that may sound, think of it next time you're chasing down fish. They are no different than we are. Chances are they are not going to be in that totally flat void of any kind of character bottom. They're just not going to be there.
No,
unless, let me interject, unless, and I'm proving this daily when I'm out fishing now, unless there's bait there.
Food.
That flat, with all this broad masses of perch are out there, you're going to find some big fish. Dotted around.
Pete, what I view those, and you're 100% right. Cisco's, whitefish, emerald shiners, but what I look at that as is moving structure.
Sure.
And so when we find the Cisco's and we find the smelts, and you see 2 or 3 big arcs underneath, that's just lake trout waiting to come up.
Hang on.
And they're following the moving structure.
We
awesome.
run at Hawk Lake, not far from you, where you'll see a cluster of bait, and all of a sudden this great big, and in that lake, that big hook means one thing and one thing only, a big eye.
Nice.
Yeah. So did you come there this year at all, Gord? Were you able to make it out to Hawk Lake at all?
I haven't yet. With the little bit of resurgence, Manitoba's had some issues. We'll see. My wife has chronic lung and autoimmune disease, so I'm really, really playing it safe right now.
Yeah, good for you. Understandable.
She's yelling at me now that I'm giving away her health. She got me in trouble. Now she's swearing.
We're running out of time, so unfortunately we're gonna have to cut you short. But wow, what a great this was a great evening. We've had a lot of great evenings with you. We had a lot of great Saturdays with you. We've had a lot of great times with you. This was a pretty special one. So
for sure,
you sharing, and for those of you watching out there, and especially if you're a newbie here, this was not even the tip of the iceberg. You want to find out more about Gord, check him out. His name is Gord Pyzer. We call him the Doc here, but his name is Gord Pyzer. You can find him on Outdoor Canada magazine. He is the fishing editor of that fine publication. Ontario Tourism uses him as the ambassador, and why wouldn't they, to Ontario fishing. So he blogs there. It seems like every day. I don't know where you find the time to still fish, by the way. But you can go there and check out some of his blogs. They're all archived. You can punch in species and you can punch in patterns. You could whatever you want, and you'll find Gord's work there. As he is also on fishingcanada.com. Where you can follow him there. And short of that, be here every Tuesday evening, and we'll see if we can snag him.
The one thing I will say for all those walleye guys out there, Ange and Pete, is tomorrow, I did get so many emails from folks recently about having trouble catching walleye. Tomorrow's blog that's going to go up on outdoorcanada.ca is on walleye on Shield, Northern Ontario, Central Ontario type lakes. So if you're into walleye, guys, check it out tomorrow. It'll be up.
Perfect. Well said, Gordon.
My friend, go tell Lynn not to be upset with you. It's not
I'm going to be banished to the porch now.
I do not want to be you right now, Gordon. Oh boy.
Take care, brother.